How does an investigation go off the rails? So far off the rails, it fails to come up with a credible explanation for the crime. That's the question we continue asking ourselves as we investigate the suspicious death of Daniel Reed Smith, whose body was found on the railroad tracks of rural Dorchester County in August of 2018. While some members of law enforcement seem quick to blame DJ for purportedly placing himself in the path of an oncoming train, there's far more to this story. But as a grieving family struggled and searched for answers, their commitment to assisting the badge-carrying authorities was met with resistance and resentment. Those charged with the sworn duty of finding out what happened to DJ seemed content to let the clock run out on key evidence, allowing precious time to slip away in making his murder even harder to solve. In a report detailing the course of the criminal inquiry, these investigators could not see past the prevalence of the drug culture in DJ's young life, and they did not hide their disdain when family members presented them with evidence that pointed them away from this conclusion. This was no ordinary family, though. DJ's stepfather was a seasoned investigator with the South Carolina First Circuit Solicitor's Office, someone who was intimately familiar with what should have been taking place during the investigation. Eric Melendez was acutely aware of the inconsistencies. This law enforcement family, whose hearts had been broken by the tragedy, knew DJ to be more than his circumstances. As such, they could see the few leads that police were pursuing for failing to provide a full explanation for what happened, specifically how DJ's body came to be found under a train miles from the place where he was last seen alive. If you're joining us for the first time, please go back and listen to the first two parts of DJ's story, found in episodes 7 and 9 of this podcast. In those two shows, you'll meet DJ's parents and become familiar with the events and people who are present in the final moments of his life. That context will prove invaluable as we dive deeper into the details, exploring the shady cast of characters present with DJ at a rural bonfire just hours before his life ended. These characters, with their dubious accounts of DJ's last hours on Earth, are soon to become suspects in a long-running, reluctant investigation that remains unsolved to this day. And once again, there will be some graphic details shared in this episode as we delve even further into this tragedy. So listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to FITSFiles, your new home for true crime and corruption, wherever you download podcasts. I'm your host, founding editor Will Folks of FITSNews.com. Previously on FITSFiles, our team introduced you to a new investigation, Death on the Tracks, the story of Daniel Reed, DJ Smith of Dorchester County, South Carolina. This week, we start to explore the ongoing investigation into DJ's death, seeking to hold the investigators accountable, as well as those responsible for this gruesome crime. This episode has some crazy twists and turns, so get ready. It's a shocking story, a graphic story, and yes, it's a story with an ending we don't know yet. Once again, as DJ's family demands answers, fights for justice, and seeks real accountability, our team is taking that journey with them, searching for the same things ourselves, searching for truth, wherever it is to be found. Here again, our producer and lead investigator, Jen Wood.
Agent David Owens, whom you may remember for his role in the Alex Murdaugh murder investigation and trial, takes center stage in this episode as the state's special agent in charge of the investigation into the suspicious death of DJ Smith. Owen works for SLED, the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, and as we go further into the details, it is Owen's SLED case file that provides the basis for much of this discussion. In order to gain some insight into the evidence of the case as it was developed, let's walk through Owen's investigation in chronological order. Saturday, August 11, 2018, the body of Daniel Reed Smith was found on the railroad tracks in a swampy, wooded area of rural Dorchester County. When deputies arrived on the scene, they found that the place where DJ's body was located could only be accessed on foot, so they walked 1.5 miles to get there. DJ was laying between the rails, not to the side of them. His position and the way his belongings were situated in relation to his body only served to magnify the existing confusion. His cell phone was recovered from the scene still in working order. One backpack was near him, the other was 270 feet away. His boots were close, but not on his feet. His hat looked like it exploded, giving the impression that his hat and his boots were recovered from two very different crime scenes. As for valuables, DJ had $1.45 in change. The gun and knife he was known to carry at all times for protection were noticeably absent. While his bags contained drug paraphernalia, no drugs were found on his person or in his possessions. The incident report stated DJ was 6 feet 1 inches tall and weighed 160 pounds. One of DJ's legs was severed below the knee, but his pants were not similarly damaged. The tan pants did, however, display some kind of tread marks running diagonally across the front. These did not match the injury, however. One of DJ's shoulders was barely attached. A lack of blood at the scene and on his clothing seemed to indicate some, if not most, of these injuries occurred post-mortem. DJ suffered multiple head injuries. The train conductor who reported his presence on the tracks also reported that the train hit him in the head, although how he came to that conclusion is not known. This damage is different, and there's a hole in the back of his head that appears to be from a different injury. His brain is gone, it is not in his skull, and it's not on the tracks. Despite this bizarre, remote, seemingly conflicting crime scene, the investigation did not get underway for 9 days. Even though there are well-established problems with witness accounts not collected immediately in the aftermath of a crime, more than a week passed before the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office began the process of interviewing the people who were present at the party. No explanation has ever been given for this lapse.
To review where we've been, the bonfire party DJ attended on the night he died took place at a trailer rented by his supposed friends, Catherine Boyd and Ashley Adams. All of the guests were recreational drug users, and as mentioned on a previous episode, Ashley told investigators that she and DJ had a small-scale drug business going on the side to supplement their incomes. While it is believed as many as 12 people attended the party, there are only 8 people identified as being there. A 9th person, Chanel Glenn, was in her bedroom for the duration of the evening and did not interact with the partiers. She told investigators that she stayed in her room with the window open to escape a smell that made her sick. While Catherine and Ashley told her the odorous culprit was paint fumes, Chanel later learned it was more likely that it was meth. Aside from Chanel and Catherine, Ashley, and DJ, our cast of characters included partygoers Trevor McGee, Steve Creel, Michael Arana, Dustin Riley, and Heather Doyle. Of those 5, 3 are related. Michael and Heather are cousins of Steve. And of the 8, all but 1 would be doing time in a county jail for one thing or another while the investigation was underway. This is an important consideration as we make our way through the timeline of the investigation. Why? Because it means any delays in interviewing these individuals did not occur because their locations were unknown. Agent Owens' SLED report mentions 4 individuals whose partial names or nicknames came up during the investigation, but who were not identified by law enforcement. 1 or 2 of them were at the party. Of course, their whereabouts are unknown. They were not identified, not interviewed, and their potential criminal status is unknown. As for the one named individual who managed to avoid the inside of a county jail in the aftermath of DJ's death, Trevor McGee, whom DJ had been staying with, he was found guilty of drug possession in a Berkeley County bench trial on August the 7th, just 3 days before the party. In other words, everyone who attended this event had some nexus to lawbreaking before or after the gathering.
Following the SLED report chronologically, it's clear two things happened within the first week of the investigation. The day after DJ's body was discovered, an autopsy was performed. And 5 days later, a Dorchester County detective sent an email request to Norfolk Southern Railroad asking for documentation of train speeds, along with statements from crew members and video captured from that section of the railroad tracks. This is fundamental to the investigation, and yet incomplete information will be provided by the railroad. Within days, the name of a suspect had already emerged through the rumor mill in Dorchester County, and on August 20th, just 9 days after the murder, that suspect was arrested on unrelated charges. Court records show Steve Creel was arrested for driving under suspension and subsequently charged, within a month of DJ's death, with possession of stolen items, which included a gun. This arrest fueled the rumors that Steve shot and killed DJ before dumping his body on the railroad tracks. Despite these reports, Steve Creel was not questioned at this time, nor would he be questioned anytime soon. One possible reason? The apparent irrelevance of the gun to the crime at hand. Well, the predominant theory was that Steve killed DJ by shooting him. There was little evidence aside from the antidotes making their way through town to suggest this was true. In fact, if there was any part of the investigation that was pursued to an exhaustive conclusion, it was this, and only this. It did not appear that DJ was shot. The autopsy noted no exit or entrance wounds. There were no gunshot wounds of any kind observed. The back of DJ's t-shirt and his bags were tested for the presence of gunpowder residue, and none was found. The report, which revealed these findings, further explained that the results of this lab test could be affected by environmental conditions, like for instance wind or rain. Still, the gunpowder residue results did not become available until the end of October, which makes it difficult to understand why Steve Creel was not questioned when he was arrested on the other charges. Looking back, this would seem to be the first ominous sign that SLED's delayed investigation wasn't asking the most obvious questions of the most obvious people.
Was there a reason why investigators weren't looking in Creel's direction? Did they have a different hunch that was guiding their actions? Or was the lack of evidence stifling their inquiries? Maybe they were waiting on some bit of information, something they expected would provide them with the direction they needed to start making headway in the case. If so, what could it be? Something did happen on the day of Steve Creel's arrest, though. Whether by coincidence or intention, that was the same day law enforcement officers began interviewing people who were at the bonfire party. They started with Catherine and Ashley, the hosts of the gathering. In what certainly appeared to be a coordinated effort, the roommates explained how DJ left their trailer on foot, walking toward Ridgeville in the early morning hours after getting into an argument with Ashley. Steve Creel, who was dating Catherine, is Native American and lives on a nearby reservation. Plotting these points on a map, the trailer where the party was located, an abandoned house many locals believe was the site of DJ's murder, and the Indian reservation where Creel resides are all located within a short distance of each other. They are also all located within several miles of the railroad tracks where DJ was found. Another week passed with no documented developments in the case. Then, on August 27, investigators noted they were able to review video surveillance footage from a mining company located between the train tracks and the trailer rented by Ashley and Catherine and Ridgeville. This mining company was strategically located on the path DJ would have likely walked after leaving the party. However, the video observed was determined to be of no evidentiary value.
On Tuesday, August 28, 2018, 2.5 weeks after DJ's body was found, partygoer Michael Arana was shot at the home of Steve Creel. Arana survived, but he lost an eye. This incident was documented by emergency personnel and responding law enforcement officers. It was also mentioned in subsequent interviews with people who were at the party, and in an interview with a partygoer who claimed to have been at Creel's home during the shooting. Believing that Michael witnessed DJ's murder, or was possibly an accomplice who assisted Steve in allegedly leaving DJ on the railroad tracks, many of these individuals surmised that Steve shot Michael as a warning not to talk to the authorities about what transpired. Inexplicably, authorities were still not attempting to talk to Steve or Michael. Meanwhile, Ashley and Catherine were merely asked to provide written statements as to their recollection of events on the night DJ disappeared. One additional witness was interviewed before the month of August drew to a close. That was Chanel Glenn, the third roommate who remained shut in her room throughout the party, sick from the fumes. Trevor McGee, whom DJ was staying with at the time he died, and the man with whom he left the party with for a brief time on the evening before he was found on the tracks, was finally interviewed for the first time on September 17th, more than a month after DJ's death. Aside from Trevor's interview, the month of September was marked by a cycle in which investigators repeatedly asked Norfolk Southern Railroad to provide information about the trains that ran that night, their speeds, any images captured by their video recorders, and interviews with their crews. Repeatedly, Norfolk Southern officials delayed, evaded, and put off investigators, even after a search warrant was obtained and presented to the company. Twice during that month, investigators met with railroad officials, each time expecting to obtain information or interviews, but each time found themselves leaving empty-handed. At one point, a meeting was set to interview the crew of one train, but upon arrival, the investigative team learned that the crew members had not been identified, so no one was present for their interview. When audio recordings of the train radio communications were belatedly provided on October 17th, they were entirely unusable due to automated announcements that made the communications impossible to hear. At one point, a railroad official told investigators it was unlikely they would be able to recover any of the documentation they were seeking since more than 30 days had lapsed. In this instance, the investigation had been seeking this information from the very beginning. Aside from the autopsy, the request for the railroad information was the first action taken towards investigating DJ's death. To say the railroad's responses were elusive would be an understatement. They seemed to be trying to escape liability. But for what?
On November the 1st, 2018, nearly 3 months later, Norfolk Southern finally produced a 3-member crew who could not recall much about that night. This was the crew from the 4:05 a.m. train, which observed an unidentified mass on the tracks in the pre-dawn darkness. In interviews with investigators, crew members said they had not seen anything and were not aware of the train striking anything or anyone. This crew told investigators they boarded in Ridgeville at 1:30 a.m. and waited an hour for the train in front of them to clear the tracks before beginning the run. Considering the circumstances surrounding their untimely responses, the railroad's conclusion that too much time had passed for the retrieval of this information seemed altogether contrived. Starting the clock at 11 p.m. on the evening of Friday, August the 10th, 2018, SLED discovered there were 5 trains which traveled through the area, the 5th being the one that reported seeing DJ on the tracks around 6:30 p.m. on August 11. According to correspondence with Norfolk Southern, cameras on all but one of the other trains were not operating properly. And since the existing video from that train, the second of the 5 trains, had reportedly gone unnoticed by the crew at the time. Only the conductor on the fifth and final train actually reported seeing DJ. That last train had 70 cars and weighed 6,000 tons. At 60 or 70 miles an hour, it took a mile and a half to stop. If the response from Norfolk Southern to law enforcement inquiries was disappointingly incomplete, comments from Agent David Owen are perplexingly unresolved.
The word culpable appears precisely one time in the documents attached to the investigative report from SLED. Owen used that word in a search warrant as he describes why certain information was essential to the case, why it must be turned over. The word culpable was used to describe the information held by the railroad, Norfolk Southern Railroad. Culpable means deserving to be blamed or to be considered responsible for something bad. Here's Owen's statement. It is the affiant's belief that the Norfolk Southern Corporation holds culpable information pursuant to this death investigation that will assist investigators to determine an appropriate timeline and means of death. When you consider that for the duration of the report, Owen makes every effort to paint DJ as being the only one to blame for his presence on the tracks, his one invocation of the word culpable as it relates to the railroad is astounding. About 1,000 people lose their lives on train tracks every year. About 60% of those fatalities occur at railroad crossings, often faulty railroad crossings. The other 40% are called trespassers. They are described this way because it is generally assumed that most people who die on the tracks are train hoppers or hobos, people who jump on a train to ride it for free. It's a dangerous mode of transportation, to be sure. While train hopping is a lifestyle choice for some, it was not an activity DJ would embrace, according to his family members. They consider it highly unlikely that this would explain his presence on that particular stretch of railroad track at that particular time. Nonetheless, Agent Owen continued to reiterate his conclusion that DJ either walked to that point on the tracks or hopped on a train to get there, the only two possibilities from the perspective of his notes in the case file. No other partygoers would be interviewed until the following year, which places the interviews of Steve and Matthew Creel, Michael Arana, and Heather Doyle anywhere between 5 to 6 months after the death of DJ Smith, long past the time when their memories would be fresh. The interviews with the Creels and Arana were conducted on February 7, 2019, the same day agents enter an abandoned house tied to the investigation for the first time, an abandoned house that many believe played host to the murder of DJ Smith. Before we jump ahead to that point in time, there's another odd side story that may be relevant to the mystery of DJ's death, or it may just be another distraction. That's for you to decide. When DJ was found, he was missing some of his belongings. He was known to carry a gun and a knife for protection, but both of those weapons were missing. Absent from another location were his fishing poles. Law enforcement did not appear to be looking for these items when two of the three turned up as inexplicably as they were taken. In fact, it's not at all clear whether investigators even knew these items were missing until DJ's sister reported that they had been returned. The fishing poles by someone called Bear and the knife by Ashley. DJ's gun was never returned nor recovered. When the fishing poles were returned to DJ's father, it was revealed they had been in the possession of a couple of individuals who were by all accounts not at the party. Bear and an associate. How and when they were taken and why they were being returned months later, we may never know. But the circumstances surrounding the theft of these items from DJ marked another aspect of this investigation in which leads were not pursued and potential persons of interest were not interviewed.
As we were preparing this episode of FITSFiles, something was uncovered that may be of significant evidentiary value, something which may tie back to that word we used earlier, culpable. So many times, after examining all that is known about a case, we find ourselves coming away even more confused than when we started. Every plausible theory seems to be thwarted, blunted by an obstinate, immovable truth that cannot be reconciled with the rest of the narrative. You know the feeling I'm talking about, when something that you know in your bones has to be true just isn't, or seems to have been taken totally off the table by new evidence. What do we do when none of it makes sense, when nothing seems to fit, when nothing is as it seems? In such situations, what do you cling to? What do you discard? What do you do? Before we reveal this new evidence, where do you think we go from here? Because this next bit of information, it isn't going to fit neatly into any particular theory of who killed DJ. In fact, it may cause all of us to rethink everything we thought we knew about this case. But that reminds me, I hope you'll consider this an open invitation to look through all of the case files from this investigation for yourself at FITSNews.com. And don't just look, participate in the conversation. Be part of the resolution. Let us know what you think happened. No one should be shy about sharing their perspectives, their observations, and their conclusions as we continue together to seek the truth, not just on behalf of DJ and his family, but other victims of countless unsolved crimes. Again, you can review the case files at FITSNews.com and send your feedback to research@FITSNews.com. That's research@FITSNews.com. Now, back to Jen and our plot twist.
As we reviewed the 3 still images provided by Norfolk Southern Railroad, we observed something that seems to have been overlooked until now. Something that potentially calls into question the role of the railroad in this tragedy. The still photos from one of the 5 passing trains are a series of images seconds apart that vaguely indicated something on the tracks. Railroad authorities have referred to those photos as showing the aforementioned quote-unquote unidentified mass, or DJ. This train's crew told investigators they did not recall seeing anything in the path of the train, or hitting anything as the train barreled through. The photos display the train's speed, 43.7 miles per hour. Also, the images taken as the train is rapidly approaching something on the tracks are so poor it would be difficult to extract any information from them. Perhaps this is why this information was not discovered before. The third photo provided by the railroad shows an unexpected change in circumstances. As this image was recorded, the train's horn is blowing, and the brakes have been applied, cutting its speed in half to 21.9 miles per hour. But why? Why did this train brake so suddenly and sound its horn on a completely straight, totally remote stretch of track? The braking system is not tied to the video surveillance system, which means a person would have to have noticed something that would cause them to sound the horn and apply the brakes.
Yeah, so we met with him. He was a casualty representative. I don't remember his exact title with the railroad, but we met with him in a public place after his death. He brought some still images of whatever the mass was on the railroad tracks, the only one capture that we had. But he assured us, he would, I have a lot of confidence in this guy, but he basically said that he was not struck by the train. That, by all appearances, it appears that, he was on the tracks before the trains ever came through. It's not to say that he didn't have any contact with what he referred to as an appendage, something hanging below the train, such as the connections between the cars,
Right.
or some other appendage that's hanging down would have struck him as it passed over. But once the train comes through, he goes, like he explained to us, he goes, I could lay underneath that train every train that goes by has a certain clearance, and it's going to be the same clearance for the most part. But he goes, I could lay underneath that train and nothing would strike me. The only thing that's going to hit me is that appendage, or maybe the front of the train, as it passes over. But once it goes through, they're going to be all the same. Pretty much all those trains are the same. They ride the same, other than the things that hang in certain areas are going to be different.
So his injuries weren't severe enough for him to have been standing and the train hit him.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah, he said that, I gave him basically we were given scenarios. Initially, Sergeant Carson at Dorchester, the Monday we went to meet with him to try and get his wallet for the funeral, his version was that he stood in front of the train and let the train hit him, that it was a suicide. And at that point, I didn't know anything about, I hadn't seen pictures, or I had absolutely nothing other than what they were telling me and what we had heard. But there's no way that, I could just, she knew her son better than, that's her son, but I knew that was not a reality. I wasn't going to believe that, but that's what he said. And then as the investigation moved forward, there was a lot of pressure on Dorchester County because of, in my opinion, they're just like slow going, not a lot of activity. And I knew there wasn't a lot of activity because I know the people that they needed to talk to, and they weren't talking to any of them. So I knew they were, what's going on. And eventually they called in SLED for assistance. And then eventually they took over as the lead agency investigating the case. There were some things that Dorchester still, kept their hand in because of conflicts with SLED or whatever, and they kind of handled that. But, SLED's version, David Owen, who was a investigator assigned to it with SLED, his version of it is he said that he was either climbing on or climbing off the train, and he fell. And I can tell you that I know that the speed of all those trains going through there were 45 miles an hour, at least. And there's no way, I couldn't imagine trying to grab a train at 45 miles an hour and climbing on. Likewise, climbing down off of a train at 45 between the cars or on the side of the cars, where he ended up in between the rails, there would have been nothing left of him if he would have fell between the rails of a moving train at 45. And the casualty guy said that. And likewise, if he would have tried to climb on or off the train at 45, we certainly would have found him outside the rails of the train and not.
Right. He was in between the two rails.
Correct.
Laying there.
Right.
He wasn't on a rail. He wasn't on the side of the rail. He was directly in between the two rails.
Yeah.
You've been listening to FITSFiles, a true crime and corruption podcast written, directed, and produced by FITSNews. We're the team that first broke the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga and the Cheer Incorporated sex abuse scandals wide open. I'm Will Folks. I'm joined on this show by producer and lead investigator Jen Wood, by special projects director Dylan Nolan, by researcher Callie Lyons, and the rest of our team. We're committed to bringing you this series of investigative reports in which we uncover layers of truth lurking beneath the surface. We offer exclusive interviews and insights, provide critical background and context, and reveal previously unreported details. If you appreciate independent journalism like that, I hope you'll support our work and subscribe to FITSNews.com. There, you can view all of our original reporting, browse the case files, and be the first to receive breaking news on all the stories we cover. Your support makes everything we do possible. Your subscription helps us hold those in power accountable. So please, subscribe today. That's FITSNews.com. And while you're at it, please like us on the podcast platform of your choice and consider leaving a review.